Hello, and thank you so much for joining us. Whether you're watching on TV or online, I'm Anthony Robart. We are waiting for the latest update from Prime Minister Trudeau in about 15 minutes. He is expecting to walk out of his home at Rideau Cottage. He will speak to the media, speak to the nation, and then take questions from reporters. There you see a live shot. And the weather, not exactly the best, but nonetheless, and not pretty ominous when you look into what kind of day this is in terms of the numbers. And it is a day of numbers, certainly. The federal government has finally revealed its COVID-19 projections. And as I mentioned, numbers right there are grim. In the short term, look at that. Health officials anticipate roughly 22 to 32,000 cases by this time next week. That would equate, or could equate, to 500 to 700 deaths. As for the long term, well, really, that's up to us, according to the Chief Public Health Officer. She is projecting between 11,000 and the worst case scenario, as many as 300,000 deaths from COVID-19. Now, with strong measures in place, officials anticipate about 5% of the population would contract the virus, and the death toll would sit at around 22,000 people. Still extremely grim numbers. The worst case scenario would see 80% of the population infected, 300,000 deaths. But Dr. Theresa Tam says we have an opportunity to control the epidemic and ultimately save lives.
It is a matter of life and death, really. And when I say, we are the authors of our fate, this is something that is really serious, and every Canadian should do our utmost. And we know we can. We're a resilient group of people. We want to protect others. So I think, everybody will be doing their best.
Federal health officials would not give a timeline as to when the pandemic might peak or certainly end. So let's take a look at where the COVID numbers stand in Canada right now. Across the country, around 20,000, just under, have tested positive. About half of those in Quebec, where there are now more than 10,000 cases. In Ontario, there are now more than 5,700 cases. The most recent numbers came out just a short time ago. Alberta now reporting more than 1,400 infections. British Columbia now with over 1,300 confirmed cases. Across Canada, more than 430 people have died. All right, let's bring in Mike LeCouture right now. And Mike, judging from those numbers, the projections coming from Dr. Theresa Tam and her colleagues, to say they are sobering is a bit of an understatement.
Yeah, they are, and they did provide a really wide range of where we could be in this, and asked many times, Theresa Tam, Dr. Tam basically said, look, we're not exactly sure where we are on it. We're definitely on the lower end at this point, but it's up to everybody to keep the physical distancing, to keep doing what we've been telling you, or else we could sky back up. So, the fact that they had this wide range of possible deaths of on the low end of 11,000 and the high end 300,000, it kind of mirrors what we've seen in a bunch of the different provinces recently, where they've had these models that they've released and that they've kind of been all over the place. And I say all over the place because they are presenting these wide ranges of worst case scenario where we would have taken no physical distancing measures, and we already know that all provinces and all Canadians have taken those measures. So I find it a little interesting that we're presenting that model almost as this is what it could have been had we not done all this, but thankfully we did all this. So those numbers are stark, but I think that Canadians also need to look at this and go, well, we're not there. However, the other thing that really struck me by Theresa Tam, Dr. Tam, was what she said: we don't know we've passed the peak until we do pass it. So as much as Canadians are sitting there and they'll get all of this information, they'll look at it, they'll see the curves and seeing where are we on that curve, even though on the graph, it is kind of a little vague in saying that it starts in summer 2020, that's where we possibly hit the peak. Dr. Tam said, we don't know exactly where we are just now. We will when we pass it. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting that she mentioned, and Dr. New, the Associate Chief Medical Officer, basically saying, look, we have to make sure that we understand that even when we're on the downside of the curve, that we continue to do these things. Just because we hit the peak and we're on the other end of the mountain doesn't mean it's just a jump off and everybody go outside again. It's kind of like if you go for a bike ride, a long bike ride from your home, you have to measure how tired you will be, or how you will be half tired when you get out and then make sure that you have enough energy to come back. That's kind of the planning. It's also like, climbing a mountain. Make sure that you have enough energy and that you're keeping up the measures to get on the way back down. And that's what they keep saying. Just because this looks good doesn't mean we're going to, start planning for things on July 1st and that Canada Day will be back on. We have to keep in mind that we have to stay the course. And that, I think, is one of the key messages that has to come out of that briefing.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said it. I mean, when you climb Everest, I've never climbed Everest, of course, but you hear the stories. The hardest thing is coming back down, so you need to have that. And she also emphasized the first wave, that this is the first wave, indicating there could and will be perhaps a second wave. You've seen that in other countries. And so even when you look at the low end, 11,000 people. These are lives. These are people that we're talking about, people with families. So, and this is the best case scenario. It just indicates we cannot take the foot off the gas pedal.
No, not at all. And as you're speaking to those other waves, noting that when we do let people go back outside, when we do let people either return to work or relax some of these public health measures, they will see another wave. And how big will that other wave be? Will it be a spike instead? And understanding, and I think Dr. Tam was trying to kind of warn everybody that these physical distancing measures are not really going away anytime soon. That if you want to make sure that the wave is lower and lower as we go until there's full eradication or full herd immunity, as they call it, that we have to keep these types of physical measures, physical distancing measures in place to some extent. So it's not going to be returned to normal. I think if you're reading between the lines, in a sense, the doctors are basically saying, if you had plans for the summer, you might want to mothball them, because either way, we are going to see the continued effects of physical distancing and different health measures continue. I mean, we are only April 9th today. We still don't know if we've hit the peak. And once we hit the peak, there's still a long way down. And then after that, making sure we don't hit those waves again. So I think the message that they're trying to do, and possibly why they've been hesitating to have this type of a briefing, because it is sobering. People will have to realize this is not going to go away anytime soon, and we're going to have to keep this up. So potentially helping people get their heads around that now, that if you think that this is going to be going back to normal in July, think again, because it doesn't look like it will, Anthony.
All right, we all know that, of course, the Prime Minister will be facing a lot of questions when it comes to projections, and also job numbers came out today. We'll get into that in a moment, but what else are you hearing? Is there any news? I mean, this has been a week of a lot of news between the wage subsidy, between the CERB and the numbers on that. Do we expect anything new today?
Not really. When we sort of have a morning briefing, when we talk to people inside the government and sort of ask them what we can expect from it, it was a pretty, quick exchange of notes and saying, so I guess it's going to be projections and the jobless numbers, and it was just a quick yes. I can tell you that there are updates on the CERB and how people continue to apply for that. Today is obviously if you are born, if your birth month is October, November, December, and you can finally apply for them. What we can say is that yesterday they had a total of almost 750,000 new applicants. The total for this week of claims of people that have applied for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, 2.5 million. The total that they've received since March 15th, which also includes EI claims, because if you did apply for EI before this week, but after March 15th, you're automatically put into the CERB stream. Get this, Anthony, 5 million applications. And the amount that they've processed since March 15th, 4.58 million. So again, I've said this a number of times, I'll say it again. If you're going to complain about, whether or not you're getting your checks or not, or your direct deposit, keep in mind, since March 15th, they've had 5 million claims. They've processed 4.58 million claims. They're getting there. It's a big program. A little bit of patience for everybody, I think, would be appreciated.
Yeah, staggering is kind of an understatement. And we talked about the job numbers. We'll have a little more information on this in a little moment, but just to give you a sense, more than 1 million people in this country lost their jobs in March alone. And it's interesting and intriguing in so many ways, because this is between March 15th and March 21st. So this is a small sample size. Perhaps, likely, the numbers will get much worse when the numbers from April come in. I mean, any sense of where this is going to go?
Well, I mean, if those CERB claims are any indication, yeah, it's going to skyrocket. And I know there'll be economists who will look into this, and people who do jobs numbers for a living who will look into it and talk about how big this is. I think we also need to put it on a world scale and sort of understand that it's kind of extenuating circumstances, and these will be historic numbers. First time in our history that we've had something like this, though.
All right, Mike, thank you so much. Let's head to Calgary right now, and obviously Alberta could see the most staggering number of job losses. Right now, a little more than 117,000 that were lost in the month of March. 500,000 people in that province could be unemployed. That is a projection by the Premier. Let's bring in Heather Yerkes-West. She joins us from Calgary. Heather, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, unprecedented job numbers in the country, but especially Alberta, which is, going into this, it was obviously in a difficult situation. I mean, capture the mood in this province and really the plan to sort of mitigate this and get out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a great deal of anxiety. As you say, we're coming into this from after a number of years of very, very high unemployment rates. We're talking about in 2016 we were approaching 10% unemployment. This morning we're getting close to 9%. But the Premier warning Albertans that this could get much worse. We could see 25% unemployment in Alberta, 1 in 4. It's really difficult to wrap your head around those numbers. And when you're talking about at an individual level, these are people that were barely back on their feet after the last oil crash. I spoke with one man last week. He declared bankruptcy in 2016. He lost literally everything. He was just working again. He was really starting to feel optimistic at the beginning of 2020. And of course, then we just have the bottom falling off. He was laid off again, unsure of how he's going to be able to weather this storm yet again. So there have been some measures. Of course, Alberta is so dependent on oil and gas, and we have seen oil and gas kind of taking wallops from multiple sides. There's, of course, the COVID-19 crisis that has caused global demand for energy just to plummet. But we've also seen oil prices crash, and that is in response to the actions of Saudi Arabia's OPEC. A month ago, they were talking with Russia about cutting back on production. Russia kind of balked. Saudi Arabia responded by turning on the taps, and then we just saw this downward pressure on oil prices like we've never seen. The West Texas Intermediate, the North American benchmark, plummeting down to $20 a barrel. But of course, Alberta oil trades at a significant discount. Prices there were trading below $4 at one point. That's the price of a Big Mac sandwich or a latte for a barrel of oil. But the Premier, Alberta's Premier, also warning that could get significantly worse, warning that we could see negative oil prices and be in a position where we're having to pay people to take away Alberta oil, which is really unprecedented and quite frightening, not just for the oil companies and those people that work in the energy sector, but also for Alberta's economy, because this is a crown resource. Most of Alberta's revenue comes from oil and gas. So this is an incredible time of anxiety. We're hearing Alberta's Premier already talk about kind of a path forward, because of course this economic crisis will sort of linger for Alberta well beyond the COVID-19 crisis. He's put together sort of a panel to talk about forward planning. A lot of business leaders and even former Prime Minister Stephen Harper is on that panel, just looking for sort of a path forward for what really is a really unprecedented economic crisis for this province.
Yeah, the path forward right now, it's right now a dark tunnel that a lot of people are looking for that light. It's hard to see right now, but of course we are watching very closely. Heather, thank you so much. Heather Yerkes-West joining us from Calgary. And some news overseas. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, really no news when it comes to this. He remains in intensive care, but is improving. That's at least some good news according to officials. Johnson was hospitalized, if you recall, on Sunday night, moved to the ICU on Monday. The 55-year-old has received oxygen support, has not been put on a ventilator. While he is out of action, the country has entered its deadliest phase of the outbreak. Now, on Wednesday, the UK had its biggest spike, in fact, in COVID-19 deaths. The United Kingdom recorded 1,000 deaths over a 24-hour period. This brings the total number of fatalities above 7,000, and that number going in the wrong direction. The nation has confirmed more than 60,000 cases. The United States, however, remains the global epicenter of the virus with more than 430 cases. Worldwide, well over 1.5 million confirmed cases of coronavirus. All right, if you're just joining us, we are, of course, waiting for the Prime Minister, and I was just given the 2-minute warning. So let's stay in Ottawa, in fact, and bring in David Akin, our chief political correspondent. I mean, where do you want to begin, David? I mean, you have the job numbers, which are staggering. You have the projection of life and death staggering as well. And then so much of this tied to testing, and what many argue is the lack of testing in this country. So, where do you want to go?
Yeah, well, I think they kind of all are tied together, actually, so I'll try to wrap it up a bit. First on the job numbers, absolutely. So 1 million people in 1 week in March are out of work. But we know that 4.5 million people have applied for the CERB. What's one of the conditions of the CERB? That you lost all employment income for a period of 14 days. So it's pretty safe to say that 4.5 million Canadians in a workforce that is 19.5 million big. Remember, 19.5 million Canadians are in our workforce, and about 1 in 4 said, David, I had no income. Now,
my apologies. As always, we got interrupted. Prime Minister Trudeau is about to speak. Let's listen in.
About the job report we just received for March. As stark as those numbers are, they aren't a surprise for a lot of Canadians. Each one represents a different story. A worker who's been laid off, a family that's having to hunker down, a community that's anxious about today and tomorrow. We've all seen the impact of COVID-19. We've all knew this was going to be a tough time and that countries around the world are in a similar situation. But that's no comfort if you're out of a job, if you're having difficulty making ends meet. You need real support. So we're doing our best to help you bridge to better times. On Monday, we launched the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. More than 4.5 million claims have been processed, which means people are already receiving their $2,000 for this month. We're also working on legislation to bring in a wage subsidy to help employers keep people on the payroll while working on new loans for business owners. We will keep expanding our 3-point economic plan to protect jobs, support business owners, and get everyone the help they need. Things will get better, and once they do, you can be sure that our country will come roaring back. As a country, we've gotten through tough times before. We've stood together, united and strong. On Vimy Ridge, more than 100 years ago today, thousands of Canadians gave their lives so that our country would know peace.
Today, remember those who fell at Vimy Ridge more than 100 years ago today. We remember the sacrifices they made for our country. They fought to defend the values that we hold dearly: democracy, freedom, equality, values that define, still today, our country.
Noted, reflecting on Vimy. It was a moment ordinary people did extraordinary things. Fathers and sons, brothers and friends, their sacrifice and courage defined what it is and what it meant to be a Canadian. And their legacy lives on in the women and men who continue to step up and serve us in uniform, in our nurses and doctors who put themselves in harm's way for us all to stay healthy, and in everyone who steps up and asks what they can do for their fellow Canadians. That's what makes Canada strong, and that will be our path forward, no matter what tomorrow may bring. Right now, the future can seem even more uncertain than normal. If you've lost your job, if you're worried about an elderly parent, you probably want to know what to expect. Earlier today, we released our modeling on how we think this pandemic might unfold. The modeling shows that COVID-19 arrived in Canada later than in other countries, So we're in an earlier stage of the outbreak. That means we have the chance to determine what our country looks like in the weeks and months to come. Our healthcare systems across the country are coping for the time being, but we're at a fork in the road between the best and the worst possible outcomes. The best possible outcome is no easy path for any of us. The initial peak, the top of the curve, may be in late spring with the end of the first wave in the summer. As Dr. Tam explained, there will likely be smaller outbreaks for a number of months after that. This will be the new normal until a vaccine is developed. But as we saw, that is so much better than we could face, all of us, if we do not rise to the challenge of this generation. The path we take is up to us. It depends on what each of us does right now. It will take months of continued, determined effort. We'll need to keep practicing physical distancing, staying home, and washing our hands. It will help. It will help get the numbers that Dr. Tam was talking about, between 4,000 and 44,000 deaths, as low as possible.
I know that Dr. Tam and all the public health agency team worked hard to prepare these forecasts and to ensure that all the information is updated. We're continuously communicating with provinces and territories to obtain from them their latest data. Earlier today, we showed you our forecast, which shows that the COVID-19 arrived in Canada later than in other countries, and therefore that we're at an earlier stage of the epidemic. That means that our acts have even more importance to decide what our country will look out in the weeks and months to come. For now, our healthcare systems are handling the situation, but we are at a fork in the roads. There's one road leads to the best results, and it will not be an easy one. We might reach the peak at the end of the spring, and the first vague may end sometime this summer. But, as Dr. Tam explained, we'll probably see a few other lesser vagues of infection during the ensuing months. And that will be the new reality up just until we find a vaccine. But as we saw this morning, there is a better scenario. This is a better scenario than if we refuse to act. The road taken will depend on each and every one of us. We must be very disciplined over the next months. We have to continue to stay at home and to wash our hands. That is how we will avoid thousands of deaths, and we will reduce the number of cases.
Especially as the weather gets nicer. If you have kids, it's even tougher. But to get them back outside and running around the playground and park as soon as possible, you need to keep them inside for a little longer. This will work, and we'll be with you every step of the way. Just this week, we received millions more masks to keep our frontline workers safe, and we have contracts to get more ventilators. We're helping industry mobilize, like the entrepreneur from Vars, Ontario, who's creating reusable visors for hospitals across the province. And we've continued to support Canadian researchers working on a vaccine. We're pulling out all the stops to beat this virus and help you get through this time. On doit tous faire notre part.
Everybody has to do his share, governments, businesses, and citizens. Therefore, keep staying at home. Only do your grocery shopping once a week, or even less than that, less often. And if you do go out, maintain a distance of 2 meters between yourself and others. That is how we will protect the vulnerable, and that is how we will protect our seniors, and we will save lives. That is how we will help our nurses and doctors who are doing such extraordinary work each and every day. I know that it isn't easy, but it won't last forever. Eventually, we will be able to go back to restaurants, parks, and movie theaters. But in order to do that, everybody has to do their share now and in the ensuing weeks.
100 years ago today, Canadians showed what metal we are made of. I know each of us will rise to be worthy of the legacy of the heroes that built this country. We can do this together. Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Let's now go to the question period, starting with the phone. Moderator? Thank you. First question, Michel Lamarche, TVA News. Go ahead. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I would like to hear you speak about the waves that Dr. Tam spoke about earlier. I wonder if, seeing that it might continue all the way to December with lesser waves at the end, you're ready to maintain all of your assistance programs up until then. We're there to help Canadians as long as it takes. But we all know that the length of time necessary will depend on our current actions. Canadians must continue staying at home. We have to continue testing in a very aggressive fashion, continue to do contact follow-up and tracking and this will allow us to remain in the green zone down in it, and we'll be able to get through the first wave. Yes, there will be other lesser waves as long as we have no vaccine. They will be easier to manage, however, because we will have developed knowledge and equipment, and also because Canadians will have developed the habit of implementing safety measures, preventative measures.
We recognize that what we are doing today is making a difference, and we are hopeful that we're going to be able to get through this in the shortest amount of time. But no matter how long it takes, we will be there to support Canadians in order to get through this. We know, though, that in order for it to last as short as it can and to harm as few Canadians as possible, we need to keep doing what we are doing. That is what leads us to the best scenario. And once we're through this first wave, as we look to the resurgences that will happen over the coming months until we discover a vaccine, now, we will be much better equipped, both with aggressive testing strategies that we're developing right now, with aggressive contact tracing, and with Canadians who know what to do when they have to socially distance, to stay home where and when necessary in the coming months.
Suivi.
Follow-up question. Yes, Prime Minister, we understand that helping Canadians at this point in time price cannot be evaluated in dollar terms, but was there an evaluation of the cost that will be spent over the next some months, and will we have the means necessary to spend maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars between now and December? Answer, this is one of the reasons for which it's very important to get through this first wave as quickly as possible. That is why in the weeks to come, people must stay at home and limit their trips. Once we've been through this first wave, as the modeling shown this morning reveals, we'll be able to open up the economy somewhat and set aside our attenuation measures that we have to adopt now in order to manage the current situation, and therefore at that point in time we'll have a bit of an economic relaunch. Everything will depend on what we're doing now, but however long the situation lasts, we will be there to help each other out, because that is what we do as Canadians, and we know that if we want to pick up our previous lives eventually, people need the necessary support to get through the crisis. Thank you. Next question, moderator.
Next question, Ian Rabson, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning. I'm just wondering, given the new projections today, do you think that we're going to have stronger measures necessary to keep people at home? Do you think people are listening? And what are those measures that you think we might need to add?
We have seen that the measures that have been taken seriously by Canadians right across the country. People are staying home. People are choosing to go out only for necessities. They are working from home as much as possible. And these are the measures we know are going to keep us on the right path. Are there things we can do to strengthen and improve? Sure, and we'll keep looking at those. But the big things that we're going to be able to improve in the coming weeks is stronger and more sophisticated and aggressive testing protocols, because every day we get better at that, and continuing to develop tools for better contact tracing. We know that those things, on top of the social distancing that we're doing right now, have the best impact on keeping this curve as short and as low as possible.
Follow up?
And I'm also wondering if there are going to be multiple waves of this, if we aren't going to be able to sort of get out of this until we find a vaccine, which we're told is 12 to 18 months away at best. Do you envision that we're going to have multiple waves of shutdowns, lockdowns, closures of the economy? And how can we handle those kinds of constant shutdowns?
I think even after we're through this first wave, we will need to remain vigilant, and we will need to bring in different measures. Normality, as it was before, will not come back full on until we get a vaccine for this. And as you say, that could be a very long way off. But once we get through this first wave, we will have developed both tools and habits that will allow us to be much more resilient and resistant to further outbreaks and spreads, that will be able to be kept localized, that will be able to fight against and protect our most vulnerable from over the coming months. It will require continued actions in different places and quick responses. But part of getting through this wave in a rapid way will be because we are developing the tools that will also help us when those wavelets come forward in the coming years, in the coming months. Okay.
We recognize that even if we get through the current wave, this first wave, we will not be coming back to our formal normal situation. We can't do that until we have developed a vaccine, and that could take 12 to 18 months. We don't exactly know how long. We hope it's earlier rather than later. But our ability as a society and as a system to be able to respond to the lesser follow-up waves that will challenge us later, which will be more localized and for which we will have more tools, will allow us to nonetheless restart a lot of our activities, but we will have to remain vigilant for at least a year. Next question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question, Maura Forrest, Politico. Line open.
Yes, thank you, Prime Minister. Today, obviously, there's been a lot of grim announcements that people have had to take in, both in terms of job numbers and in terms of these projections. They're getting this information as they're heading into a holiday weekend, when they're being asked not to celebrate with their families. I'm just wondering how you think Canadians should react to this today.
I think, obviously, this is difficult news. This is news that reflects, particularly in the job numbers, a reality that millions of Canadians have been feeling over the past weeks. That the real impact on not just our economy, but on the lives of Canadians, of workers, of families, of communities, is significant and real. But what we're also seeing in numbers from different parts of the country is that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. That if we keep doing the things that we're doing the way we're doing, as we've seen in other countries, we are able to minimize the level of the impact of this wave of COVID-19. We are unfortunately going to continue to lose people across this country in the coming weeks. But we also know that there are things that we can continue to do to make sure we get through this first wave as quickly and as low impactly as possible. That's why, as we gather with the immediate family members that we're sharing a home with right now, as we FaceTime to our loved ones and reflect through this Easter weekend, we need to know that we will continue, we can continue to do what is necessary for the coming weeks and months to get through this first wave in the right way, so we can get back to being there for each other in the coming year.
Follow-up? Yes, thank you. Dr. New this morning said he was going to be celebrating this weekend virtually with his family. How will you be celebrating?
I'm hoping to be able to see my family this weekend. Of course, the priority is ensuring that we're getting the legislation passed. Conversations are still ongoing with members of the opposition parties. We know that we need to pass this legislation to get the help to people that is needed. That's why, while we continue discussions around democratic processes and defending our institutions, which will be ongoing, which is really important to me and to all of us, we need to move forward on getting this legislation moving through the House so we can get the help out to Canadians, and that is my focus this weekend.
En français.
Okay. J'espère pouvoir passer un peu de temps avec ma famille.
I do hope to be able to spend some time with my family this weekend, but our priority is to pass the bill that will allow us to help even more people and to send out the assistance to workers and businesses. And that is why we are pursuing our discussions with the opposition parties. Now, obviously, we have to ensure that our democracy continue functioning and that our institutions remain strong in these difficult times. But we absolutely must bring back the House in order to pass this bill in order to help people. And I do hope that the opposition's party will agree with me that this assistance for Canadians cannot await.
Prochaine question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir, à vous.
Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. Mr. Trudeau, about this bill, we understand that the Conservatives have a condition for their support, that the Parliament sit in person from now on. Now, why are you not accepting that condition? What's the problem? We did it a few weeks ago. Well, first of all, we're quite open, as we demonstrated, to call back the House to pass important bills and do the work that people expect of the government and of Parliament. We also know that we have to follow the recommendations of the health experts and not gather people unless absolutely necessary. There are virtual ways of meeting, and even when we sit in reduced numbers, there are security guards, people working in the building will have to be there to support us, and we want to minimize the impacts on them, but we do want to continue to find ways and to ensure that we can keep a strong democracy with strong institutions. We're quite open to that. I think we're now at a point, however, where we should not block an important bill just because we want to continue holding discussions about whether we sit in person or not. These discussions should be ongoing. Hélène, before I'd like to answer in English first.
We do have strong democratic institutions that continue to function to serve Canadians, to get the help needed to Canadians, and provide that input from voices across the country on the impact that things are having in their community. That is essential, and we're going to continue to talk with opposition parties about how we can make sure that our institutions and our Parliament continues to function. It is something to remember that when we do gather in smaller numbers, first of all, it still requires a significant number of support staff to come into work, to be there while Parliament is functioning, and that puts them at risk as well. but it's also something that doesn't allow for members of Parliament who live in further off parts of the countries to be weighing in and make sure that their communities are being heard. That's why we are so interested in looking for virtual ways of gathering the House, and we're going to continue to work on that. But it's, I think, really important that parliamentarians get together to make sure that the work of getting the help to Canadians happens, and happens quickly, while these continued conversations about furthering our democracy in this moment of crisis continue. It's not the time to further delay getting help to Canadians.
Et en sous-question, M. Scheer dit que...
A follow-up question. Mr. Scheer says that that's not serious because the government infrastructure for getting the money in the hands of people isn't ready, and so it isn't creating a delay. Now, do you agree? And if there is a delay, would you consider the Conservatives to be responsible for that by laying down conditions, or you that is responsible because you refuse to compromise? Answer. I'm a little bit perplexed by that comment if Mr. Scheer actually said that, because we find that the debates or discussions in the House and speeches in the House are often a place where we see the impacts of things, and we can amend it to have an even better result. I don't think any party, whether it be the government party or other, know everything that goes on everywhere and under all circumstances, and parliamentarians have an important role to play in participating in improving a bill, even an emergency bill like this one. And to call the House back, it's not just a question of rubber stamping a project that we've discussed in advance, it's to have a real debate in order to ensure that we're doing the right thing for Canadians. And if that is what Mr. Scheer said, well, I'm a little bit disappointed in his lack of understanding of the importance of having this informed debate in the House when we're having a look at bills.
If indeed Mr. Scheer suggested that the debate and discussions had by parliamentarians around a given piece of legislation don't really have an impact, I choose to disagree. I think it's really important that we hear voices from every corner of the country on the potential impacts or potential improvements to the bill we're putting forward. I think that's how Parliament is supposed to work, and that's how Canadians consider that Parliament is supposed to work. So I very much look forward to the debate on our wage subsidy to see how it's going to impact, and hear from every corner of the country as much as we can on how we can make sure that it's doing the right things for Canadians. Parliament matters. The debate that happens in Parliament matters, and you can't just shrug it off like a rubber stamp that doesn't matter, because I know how deeply it matters that we have proper and robust debate on this.
David Thurton, CBC News. Prime Minister, documents show that the government has been preparing for a pandemic for over a decade, since the outbreak of SARS. But we're seeing now that, it seems like the government has been caught off guard, and Canadians are paying up the price for that. What went wrong in your planning?
I think we've seen countries around the world caught off guard by the nature of this epidemic. The challenges that we've faced in terms of getting Canadians protected are echoed in challenges faced around the world, and some countries are handling it better than others. I think Canada has done a good job of keeping on a path that is going to minimize as much as possible the reality we're in right now, and that's why we need to continue to do the things that we're doing, staying home, contact tracing, aggressive testing, and why we need to continue to listen to experts on next things we can do or other things we need to do to ensure that we're having the minimal possible impact on Canadians. And of course, there'll be lots of lessons learned from this, as there were lessons learned from SARS, and we're going to learn them and bring them into play.
What went wrong in the government's planning?
I think we all know that this was a situation that we're adjusting as best we can to. We took the advice of experts. We moved forward in significant ways. As we look back at the end of this, I'm sure people will say, oh, you could have done this a few days before, or maybe you did this one too quickly and you could have taken a few more days to reflect on it. every step of the way, we make the best decisions we can, given the information we have. And if it's not exactly right, we fix it and we try and get it better as we move forward. I think that's what Canadians expect.
Hi, Prime Minister. Molly Thomas, CTV National News. Your government says they're negotiating with the opposition right now. Can you help Canadians understand what is the holdup to recalling Parliament? This wage subsidy is sitting on the table. There are businesses we're talking to on the brink of bankruptcy here. What is the holdup right now?
My understanding is that the legislation itself is largely seen as the right solution by other parties. They may have little tweaks and improvements to make, and we look forward to working with them on suggestions or amendments that they have. But there seems to be a sense from the official opposition that this is a moment to define or determine how Parliament will function in the coming weeks, and they are negotiating around the structures. We've said we're of course happy to have these conversations. We've put forward some proposals around things that we think could work to both minimize the risk to Canadians while moving towards a virtual Parliament and ensuring the debate and accountability that is so important in our democracy. And we just hope that the official opposition will choose to realize that we need to pass this legislation quickly to get the help out to Canadians as quickly as possible. Okay. Ma compréhension, c'est que le projet de loi comme tel.
My understanding is that the bill is generally supported by the opposition parties. They recognize its importance. Now, obviously, they may have some suggestions and improvements to suggest, and we're quite open to that. The official opposition is insisting that this is also the time to determine what Parliament should look like in the weeks to come, and is suggesting strong measures. We're open to discuss that, but we believe that this discussion should be held separately from the bill, which should be itself acted on as quickly as possible in order to help Canadians as quickly as possible.
You talked about Canada having fiscal firepower. The government was planning for 4 months of uncertainty here, at least in emergency funding. How long of a financial rope do we have here, and should we be rationing that emergency funding and at all, knowing that we're in for a year here of self-isolation on and off?
We had made the decision early on that we needed to be aggressive and broad in getting help out to Canadians, and that's what we did with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the wage subsidy. And we've moved very, very quickly, and we are continuing to fill gaps and look at areas where we can do more to help Canadians. We will continue to do that. But we knew that our best chance of rebounding from this strongly and getting back to the extraordinarily successful country and economy that we've had, that we've built over so many generations, is to ensure that Canadians are supported through this, however long it takes. Now, we are extremely hopeful that we will be able to begin to restore a certain measure of economic activity in the coming months after this first wave is passed. But we will make sure that every step of the way we're giving Canadians the support they need to be able to keep themselves safe, to do what is necessary to keep us all safe, and to ensure that as we get going again, Canada continues to be successful for all Canadians.
En français.
Nous reconnaissons que
we recognize that we had to implement rather broad measures quickly in order to help the most persons possible, and that's what we did with the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit and the wage subsidy. We shall continue to do whatever is necessary for as long as needed. We hope that the first wave will only last a few more months, and this will allow us to start restart the economy with work and with supplementary measures, of course, and pursue the success that our country usually enjoys. But however long it takes, we'll always be there to support Canadians who need it. You say that it might take 12 to 18 months before we're fully back to normal. What should we expect from that? Does that mean 12 to 18 months before people kids go back to school, that people go back to work, that we go to a concert or to have a picnic in the park. Is that what you consider normal? No. What I said is that until we have a vaccine, COVID-19 will be with us for however many months that takes. The estimates are 12 to 18 months, others lesser period of time. We will have to remain vigilant and continue implementing these preventative measures. But we also should be ready to move forward if there's a new surge of the virus in certain areas of the country or in certain conditions. But if once we're through this first wave, we will be able to allow certain activities currently forbidden to restart. For example, we'll be able to gradually restart economic activity somewhat more normal than now, and this will carry on. We'll have to remain vigilant, however. It's pretty obvious that for a year and 18 months, there will be things we just won't be able to do, but there will be more things that we will be able to do if and only if we get through the next weeks and months in the right fashion. That is why we must maintain our measures for some time yet. Do you think that the toleration of Canadians will allow us to maintain these isolation measures? And there's also, I'm thinking of Indigenous communities who are saying, we have no tests, we have no doctors, we're out in the boondocks. People from the government say that it's not their problem and the federal government isn't there. So what's happening for these Indigenous communities? Will they get some help? Well, we've seen in the past, particularly when we think today of the sacrifices that prior generations of Canadians made, for example, during the two great wars, and not only people who were at Vimy and places like that, but ordinary Canadians throughout the country who had to do sacrifices for a period of years to allow us to have the country we have now built. I know that what we're going through now is difficult. That is why the government is there, to help the vulnerable population, people who lose their jobs, people who need to help their own families, and in particular to help and protect our frontline workers, whether it be in the healthcare system or our grocery store clerks, who ensure that we will be able to get through this challenge in the right manner. We will continue to be there for each other, and we will continue to support each other, and we will get through this because we are strong as citizens and as a country. Now, with regard to our Indigenous people, we are very concerned. We have been from the outset about the vulnerability of this group, and that is why we've done investments in order to improve the resilience of these communities. We do recognize that much remains to be done. We're starting to see a few cases in some of these communities. It's very concerning, and that's why we're working seriously on the issue.
Global News. President Trump is looking at tariffs on imported oil aimed at getting Saudi Arabia and Russia to reduce the flood of crude oil swamping the market. Is Canada looking at the same to support our oil and gas industry? And if not, what is the government going to do to support the industry?
I can tell you that our Minister of Natural Resources, Minister O'Regan, is closely coordinating with his counterpart, the Secretary of Energy in the United States. We recognize that the North American market and oil production sector needs to stand together on this, and we're working very closely with our counterparts and our NAFTA partners to ensure that we have a strong and united front in dealing with this global situation.
Prime Minister, Sean Silcoff from the Globe and Mail. My colleagues today wrote about the fact that Ottawa had a playbook for the pandemic 14 years ago. It was co-authored by Dr. Tam, and subsequent audits flagged problems with Canada's emergency stockpile of medical equipment. You said just a few moments ago that you were caught off guard, but given all the pandemic preparedness done here in Ottawa going back to 2006, and how some of the plans, like having enough medical supplies in our stockpile, have come up short, what will your government do to fix that going forward?
Well, I think we've already seen, and we spoke about a number of times in the early days of this pandemic, how there were significant lessons we learned from that SARS epidemic. There were things that were done or were not done in 2003 that led to significant changes in our approach on public health. And Canada was better positioned than a number of countries around the world to respond to this pandemic because we had and learned from the experience of SARS. Similarly, as we go through this time, we will learn more things about how to be even better prepared next time, if this ever happens again, as it is likely that it will in the coming decades. We need to make sure that we have the tools necessary to keep Canadians safe, and that is something that keeps evolving every single day. We will listen to science, we will share the best recommendations with Canadians, we will lean on each other, and we will get through this together. It's what we do as a country. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Thank you. That's the end of today's press conference. Have a good day, everybody.
And that concludes the Prime Minister's address to the nation. Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, David Akin. And David, I mean, right out of the gate, he referenced a battle that began on this day in 1917, ultimately cost thousands of Canadian lives, but to this day stands as a lasting symbol of national pride. Clearly, the symbolism of what happened in 1917 and what is happening in this country today, certainly not lost on the Prime Minister. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, the big takeaway here is his Easter priority is not to be with his kids. His Easter priority is get this legislation, which would make the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy a reality. It's his top priority. And let's remember something, Andy, just to put things in perspective. This Canada Emergency Response Benefit that 4 million Canadians have applied for, it's only going to cost the government $24 billion. The wage subsidy is the biggie. That's $73 billion. And that would mean all those Canadians who've applied for the CERB could go back to work if employees pick it up. Remember, employees will get the wages paid 75%. Air Canada is ready to hire back 16,000 people. WestJet ready to hire back 5,000. But this legislation's got to get passed first. So a lot of questions for both Prime Minister Trudeau and the Conservative leader Andrew Scheer. What's the holdup? It apparently is not about the legislation. It's all about how Parliament is going to function going forward. The Liberals and the Trudeau Liberals want to see some sort of virtual Parliament, and the Scheer Conservatives saying, no, we need to be here in person. We can be here in person. If you can come out and answer press conferences every day, you can stand in the House of Commons and answer questions of politicians. So that's the political battle that's happening right now. And until that political battle gets resolved, this wage subsidy, which is 3 times bigger than the existing Canada Emergency Response Benefit, it ain't going to happen. So that is Trudeau's Easter priority.
Yeah, and you wonder how much bigger it will get. I mean, you look at these numbers, more than 1 million lost in March. That number likely will go up much higher, more than 400,000 in Ontario.
It won't go up, though, if the wage subsidy program comes in.
And that was my next question.
The wage subsidy program, the whole point of it is you're back on the payroll. You're back. You won't be unemployed anymore. So these numbers will go up, but the quicker they can get this wage subsidy program in, then those unemployment numbers drop because people are now employed, albeit employed by the federal government, essentially.
Yeah, but clearly a fluid situation because we just don't know. It's almost impossible to calculate because business owners across the country right now looking at their numbers going, how do we get through this? And hoping that these loans, the wage subsidy, will be the answer. All right, David, thank you so much. We will have to leave it there. We always appreciate your insight on this and obviously a lot to get to. We look at the numbers. We talked about the economic numbers. We talked about the projections. Here's a quick recap of what Prime Minister Trudeau announced today. The Prime Minister said, we can expect the peak of this curve in late spring, with the end of the first wave coming in the summer. Smaller outbreaks as well expected in the following months, calling this really the new normal until a vaccine is developed. Prime Minister Trudeau also said we're at a fork in the road when it comes to the best and worst possible outcomes. So it comes down to us, really. If Canadians follow the restrictions and the guidelines, the outcome will be better. If we ignore the rules, then we will be on a path to the worst case scenario. Nobody wants that. He also spoke about the latest job numbers and reached out to people who are struggling economically. Things will get better, he says, and when they do, our country will come roaring back. Those are his words. millions of people across this country certainly hope that is the case. And that concludes our special coverage. You can find full details on globalnews.ca tonight, as well on Global National and all your local news platforms. For everyone here at Global News, I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you so much for watching.
Bonjour et merci
Good morning,
de vous être
and thank you very much for joining us today.
Statistics Canada
Today,
a publié
Statistics
ses
Canada
plus récents
published its
chiffres de
most
l'emploi.
recent numbers.
Ces chiffres représentent plus d'1 million de
And
Canadiens
those numbers represent
et plus
over 2
d'1
million
million de
Canadians
familles
and more than
qui
1
ont
million
peur
families
et qui reconnaissent beaucoup de difficultés.
who are
À vous
experiencing
tous,
great difficulty and who
laissez-moi
are
vous
afraid.
dire
Let me
que
tell you
nous
all
sommes ici
that
pour
we
vous.
are here for you.
Si vous n'avez pas déjà appliqué à la
If you have not
prestation
already
canadienne
applied
d'urgence,
for the Canadian Emergency
faites-le,
Relief
s'il vous
Benefit,
plaît.
please do so.
Elle est là pour vous aider.
It's there to help you.
J'aimerais aussi inciter tous les
I would
employeurs
also like
canadiens,
to encourage
s'ils le
all
peuvent,
Canadian
de
employers,
suivre
if they
l'exemple
can,
des compagnies qui ont
to follow
vu
the example
ce
of
que nous avons
companies
annoncé concernant la subvention
who
salariale et qui ont
took up
décidé
our wage
d'embaucher
subsidy
à
and
nouveau
decided
les
to
personnes
rehire
qu'elles ont dû mettre à pied.
the employees
La
they had to lay
subvention
off.
salariale
The
sera
wage subsidy
rétroactive.
will be
Nous
retroactive.
travaillons fort pour la faire
We are working
adopter
hard
par le Parlement.
to have it
Si vous
adopted
pouvez, s'il vous
by
plaît,
Parliament.
utilisez la subvention salariale,
If you can, please
salariale
use the wage
afin
subsidy
d'assurer que le plus
in order
de
to
Canadiens
ensure
possible
that as many
puissent
Canadians as
conserver
possible
leurs emplois.
can keep their jobs.
Nous savons que de nombreux Canadiens
We
reconnaissent
know
beaucoup de
that many
difficultés
Canadians
à cause de COVID-19.
are experiencing great difficulties
Certains
because
ne
of
sont pas
COVID-19.
couverts par la subvention
Some are not
salariale
covered by the
ou
wage
la
subsidy
DCU.
or the
Nous travaillons
CERB.
très fort à trouver
We
des
are working
moyens
very
pour
hard
vous
to
aider.
find ways to help them.
Today, Statistics Canada released its latest employment numbers. These figures represent more than 1 million Canadians and more than 1 million Canadian families who are experiencing great hardship and who are really afraid. To all of you, let me say, we're here for you. If you haven't already applied for the CERB, please do so. It is there for you. I would also like to urge all Canadian employers, if they can, to follow the example of those companies that have reviewed the wage subsidy commitment and have decided to hire back many people they had laid off. The wage subsidy will be retroactive. We are working very hard to get it through Parliament. If you can, please use the wage subsidy to be sure that as many Canadians as possible can keep their jobs. We also know that there are many Canadians in real trouble right now because of COVID-19. Some are not covered by the wage subsidy or by CERB. We are working hard to find ways to support you too. Okay, so today we will hear from Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, and Canada's Deputy Chief Public Health Officer, le Dr. Howard New. Et après ça, le président du Conseil du Trésor,
and then
Jean-Yves
the
Duclos.
President of Treasury Board,
And of course,
Jean-Yves
our
Duclos.
Minister of Health, Patty Hajdu, is here to answer your questions too. Dr. Tam, please.
Hello, everyone. So I'll start, as usual, with an update on the numbers of COVID-19 cases in Canada. There are now 19,774 cases, including 461 deaths. Again, these numbers I know are changing as we speak, as provinces provide their updates. In terms of lab testing, we've now completed tests for over 373,000 people, with now over 5% confirmed positive, as Canada continues to improve testing to track where the disease is spreading. Of course, when I wrote the speech last night, I started the next paragraph with the weather warming. So anyone who's looked outside the window in Ottawa or looked at the weather forecast, that is not the case right now. But the holidays are almost upon us. And I want to reiterate how important it is for us to maintain our resolve to plank the curve. So far, the efforts of all Canadians are making a difference, from healthcare providers saving lives on the front lines, to public health and lab professionals testing and tracing COVID-19 spread, to essential service workers keeping our hospitals and our homes stocked, and every Canadian who's staying at home. I recognize that these changes in our daily lives that we are asking people to make are extremely difficult. Despite the hardships, we are all in this together. Canadians' collective effort to slow the spread has allowed our health system to cope, and that means we're protecting health services for everyone. So, during important religious observances, including Passover, Easter, Vaisakhi, and Ramadan, we need to not let down our guard. That means dinners and celebrations need to be strictly limited to your existing household members only. And as I've said, the safest plan for your holidays is a staycation for the nation. Make arrangements now for virtually connecting with others over phone, email, and video chat. We need to protect each other, and that is best done by keeping physically apart but virtually together. Connecting has never been so important, so please support each other. Thank you.
Et maintenant, je donne la parole au Dr. Howard New. Dr. New, s'il vous plaît.
Dr. New, you have the
bonjour.
floor.
Tout
Please go
d'abord,
ahead.
le point sur les cas
Thank
de
you.
COVID-19
Good
au
afternoon.
Canada.
First of all,
On dénombre maintenant
the number of cases of COVID-19 in Canada is now 19,417 cases in the country, including 461 deaths. For the lab testing, we've now completed tests for over 373,000 people, and now we're 5% of them confirmed positive. As Canada continues to improve testing to track where the disease is spreading. With the weather warming, even though it's actually snowing here in Ottawa, and the holidays are almost upon us, we wish to remind all of you how important it is for us to maintain our resolve and plank the curve. So far, the efforts of all Canadians are making a difference. From healthcare providers saving lives on the front lines, to public health and lab professionals, testing and tracing the virus. Workers are keeping our hospitals and homes stocked, and every Canadian who is staying at home, despite the hardships, we must continue. We are all in this together. Canadians' collective effort to slow the spread of this virus has allowed our health system to cope. And that means we're protecting health services for everyone. That's why, even during important religious observances, including Passover, Easter, Vaisakhi, and Ramadan, we must not let down our guard. That means dinners and celebrations need to be strictly limited to your existing household members only. During these few holidays, we must protect ourselves by staying home and only contacting people by phone, email, and video chat. We need to protect each other, and that is best done by keeping physically apart, but virtually together. Connecting has never been so important. We must support each other, and please do that. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. And now, I give the floor to the President of our Treasury Board, Jean-Yves Duclos. Please go
Hello,
ahead.
everyone, et bonjour tout le monde. Bien, ce
Hello,
matin, le
everyone.
Premier ministre Trudeau a
This
laissé
morning, Prime
donné un
Minister
message
Trudeau
d'espoir et de
gave
courage.
us a
Et
message
un de
of
ces
hope and
messages
courage.
faisait référence au
And one of his
102e
messages
anniversaire du
mentioned the
début de la
102nd
bataille de Vimy
anniversary
en 1918.
of the
C'est
Vimy
un
Ridge
message
battle
qui résonne particulièrement
in
pour les gens au
1918.
Québec et dans la
This
région
is
de
a
Québec,
message that
puisque
particularly
le
resonates for
Royal
people in
22e
Quebec
Régiment,
because
qui
the
est une
Royal
institution
22nd Canadian
au
Regiment,
Québec et à Québec,
which is an
contribué
institution in Quebec
significativement à
that
cet effort de guerre.
contributed
Et donc, on se
significantly
souvient de
to
leur
that
engagement,
effort,
de leur
so
courage
we
et du
remember
sacrifice
their
qu'ils ont fait pour
commitment,
notre
their
pays. Et je
courage,
pense que
the
ça nous
sacrifice that
inspire et
they
ça nous
made for our
guide
countries,
dans les
for our
circonstances que nous
country.
vivons
And I think that
aujourd'hui.
helps us and inspires and
La
guides
deuxième
us
chose
in
que
what we
j'aimerais
must
faire,
do
c'est
today.
faire une mise à jour
Secondly, I wanted to
rapide
give you a
de
quick
l'état de la
update
situation en ce qui a trait aux demandes de prestations canadiennes
as
d'urgence.
to the
Hier, un
applications
total
we've
de
received for the
750 000
CERB.
demandes ont
Yesterday,
été
a total of
faites pour la prestation
750,000
canadienne
applications
d'urgence,
were
ce qui
made
monte à
for
5
the
millions
CERB
de,
benefit,
en
which
tout,
means
de demandes de prestations
which brings us
canadiennes
up to
d'urgence
over
depuis le
5
15
million
mars.
in all
De
since
ce 5 millions,
March 15th.
4,6
Of
millions
that 5
ont
million,
déjà été traités,
4.6 million
ce qui
were
est une
already
excellente
processed,
nouvelle
which
pour
is
les millions de
excellent
Canadiens
news for the
qui se
millions of
retrouvent dans des conditions
Canadians
difficiles
that find themselves
aujourd'hui, dans
experiencing hardship
l'anxiété
today
et dans l'insécurité
and of feeling anxious and insecure. In closing, for those Canadians born in October, November, and December, today is the day that you should file your own application for the Canadian Emergency Relief Benefit. On the Canada.ca/coronavirus.
Merci Jean-Yves et on est prête à répondre à vos questions.
Thank you, Jean-Yves. And now we are all here to answer your questions. Thank you. Today we will begin with 3 questions on the telephone.
Operator.
Thank you. Merci. We will now take questions from the telephone lines. Nous prendrons maintenant les questions de ligne téléphonique. Our first question, notre première question, is from Lena Dibb avec la presse canadienne. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour. Ma question est pour vous, Madame Freeland. On comprend maintenant que ça va durer des mois avant un retour à la normale. Cette subvention salariale, elle est pour 3 mois. Hier, on a appris qu'Air Canada va en bénéficier.
Yesterday, we learned that Air Canada will also be benefiting from that. And that is definitely an industry that will not return to normal within 3 months. I was wondering if you were beginning to think about ways
de distribuer l'argent d'une autre manière
to distribute the money in a different way than just giving it to everyone who asks for it, given that not all industries find themselves in the same circumstances.
Comme le Premier ministre a dit,
Answer.
Et comme Dr.
As the
Tam
Prime
a
Minister
dit,
said,
on comprend
and as Dr.
que
Tam
la
said,
situation
we
sera
do understand
difficile
that the situation is going to be difficult for
plus que 2 mois.
more than a
Et
month,
nous
more than
devons
2 months.
être prêts.
And we must be
Aussi, comme
prepared.
Dr. Tam a dit,
Also,
on ne sait pas
as Dr. Tam said,
exactement quand la situation
we don't know
va
exactly
finir
when
et
the
quand
situation
ce
is
sera
going to
possible
come to an
pour
end
les
and when it
Canadiens
will be
et
possible
Canadiennes
for
de
Canadians
retourner au travail.
to return to work.
Ce que le gouvernement a déjà fait et
What
ce
the
que le
government has
gouvernement
already done and what the government
continuera
will
de
continue to
faire
do
est être là
is
pour
to
les
be
Canadiens,
there for
pour les
Canadians,
travailleurs et pour
for
les
workers,
entreprises.
and for
Nous
businesses.
comprenons que cet choc
We
économique
understand that this
n'est pas
economic
causé
shock
par l'économie,
was not
par les
caused
processus économiques lui-même.
by economic
C'est un
processes
choc
themselves.
externe.
It's an
Et
external
pour
shock.
cette raison, c'est
which is
le
why
devoir pour le gouvernement
It's a duty
d'appuyer
for the government
les Canadiens,
to support
les Canadiennes,
Canadians
les travailleurs
and
et
workers
les
and
entreprises
businesses
pour si long que est nécessaire.
for as long
La
as
bonne
necessary.
nouvelle est que notre gouvernement, notre
The good
économie,
news
au
is
début
that
de
our
la
government
crise,
and our
était
economy
dans une
at the
très,
beginning
très
of this
bonne
crisis
forme.
were in very
Et
good shape.
le Canada, le fédéral, a les ressources
Canada and the federal
fiscales
government have the
pour
fiscal resources
faire
necessary
tout ce qui sera nécessaire
to do all that is
pour
required
protéger les Canadiens
to protect
pendant
Canadians
cette crise.
during this crisis.
Concernant la durée, personne ne peut pas
As
dire
for
aujourd'hui
the
pour
length of
combien
time this
de
will
temps
last, no
ce
one
sera
can say today
nécessaire
how long these
d'appuyer
measures will be
l'économie.
necessary
La
to
seule
shore
chose
up our
que nous
economy.
pouvons dire, c'est
The only
que
thing we can
nous
tell you
sommes prêts
is that we are
de
ready
faire tout ce qui est nécessaire.
to do
On a
everything that's
on a
required.
mis en place des mesures nécessaires
We have set up
aujourd'hui
necessary
et on l'a
measures
fait
today,
d'une manière très très vite.
and we
Comme
did so
Jean-Yves
very
a juste
quickly.
dit,
As Jean-Yves
le
just said,
CERB est là aujourd'hui et le
CERB,
CERB
the emergency
aide les
benefit, is
Canadiens.
there today, and it
Nous
is
voulons
already
le
helping
faire
Canadians.
dans la manière si vite avec la subvention salariale.
We could not move as
Concernant
quickly with the wage
l'avenir,
subsidy.
on
With,
pense
but
de ça.
with respect to
Et
the
la
future,
seule chose que je peux dire, mais c'est une chose importante,
the only thing I can
c'est
tell
que
you,
on sera
but
prêt
it's important,
de
is that
appuyer,
we will
de
be
soutenir
prepared to support
l'économie canadienne.
the Canadian
Merci.
economy. Thank you.
Alors, en suivi,
Follow-up
si je peux
question.
vous demander
If I may
la
ask
logique d'appuyer pendant du long
the
terme
logic
une
of
industrie
long-term
aérienne
support
qui
offered to an
manifestement
airline
ne se
industry
relèvera
that
pas de ça dans
clearly
les
will
3
not
prochains mois. Est-ce que l'argent
recover
pourrait
over
pas
the next
être
3 months from
mieux
this.
utilisé
Wouldn't
ailleurs?
that money better be of better use elsewhere?
Je pense que c'est
Answer.
important pour nous
I think it's
tous de
important for all of us to
comprendre
understand
que personne ne peut pas faire des prognoses
that
certaines
no one can come up
concernant
with certain
l'avenir. La Dr.
predictions
Tam
of the
était
future.
très très claire
Dr.
ce
Tam
matin
was quite clear
en
this morning
expliquant
when she explained the prognosis that we have when it comes to the progress of the coronavirus. Because of this great uncertainty, what we must do is precisely what we did do and are doing, which is providing the necessary support to our economy. And I would like to assure Canadians that we will continue to support our economy for as long as it's necessary to do so. It's very important for us not to let coronavirus damage our economy. We are taking the necessary steps now to protect Canadians' health and lives, but we know quite well that those necessary steps will have a serious economic impact as well. The government's work and duty is to protect the economy during that period. That is what we are doing now, and we shall continue to do so. We will protect Canada's economic capacity, and we must protect Canadians' lives. And that is what we will continue to do. I will close by saying that Canada and the federal government has the economic resources necessary to do so.
Merci, Madame la Vice-Première ministre. Prochaine question au
Deputy
téléphone.
Prime Minister. Next question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Mia Rabson with the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hi, this is a question probably for Dr. Tam. Given the modeling that you released this morning and sort of maybe the better understanding of how you see COVID-19 unfolding in Canada, are you recommending that government enact stricter measures for things like physical distancing in businesses? And if so, what additional measures do you think should be considered?
Yes, so we do have to sort of monitor the trajectory very closely on a daily basis. I think together with the other chief medical officers, we recognize that we need to try and ascertain how do we measure the effectiveness of our public health measures. Some of these studies might be quite innovative. For example, just tracking mobility of the population, and some of these kind of data people have seen sort of being published as we speak. And that tells us a little bit more about how well Canadians are doing with some of these recommendations and where we can strengthen those recommendations. I think we know that some areas of social distancing has really been reduced in terms of no one is gathering, really. We're trying to strengthen. There's certainly no mass gathering of any size. We're just trying to strengthen the message to Canadians that really you should avoid all non-essential travel and stay at home as much as possible during this critical period. I think that behavioral scientists are studying these kind of phenomena as well, and how do you nudge people to sort of do better from that perspective. We know that contact tracing is very key to make sure that we stay on the trajectory and if necessarily improve. I think yesterday I talked about the fact that you can, on the one hand, really try and support people in self-isolation and in quarantine, making sure they have the right environment to do so safely. And if they don't have the conditions at home to do that, to support them, maybe housing in a different space. I think, but on the other hand, you've seen jurisdictions come with more measures on the compliance and enforcement side to try and ensure that all Canadians know how serious this situation is and that we want them to take things seriously. So tightening up on making sure people who are sick stay at home, and that any close contacts also self-isolate is really, really important. So I can't stress that enough. And as I've said, we do continually have to improve on laboratory testing capacity. That helps you detect the cases, which is absolutely important to maintain this trajectory and put this epidemic to a first wave to a close. So it's not any really different to what we've been recommending all along. But we would, at some point, I think as we are coming down the other side of the epidemic curve, we would like to look at different ways at which we can measure the impact and success, both positive and also negative impacts of our measures as well, so that we can recalibrate as we sort of move ahead. But for sure, case detection, contact tracing, and social distancing still remain key.
Thank you, Doctor. Mia, follow-up?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, there's a lot of Canadians, I think, watching the United States and some of the scenarios going on there with a bit of alarm. And I'm wondering, how dependent is our best-case scenario modeling on border measures and how the United States does, since it does seem like their situation is more dire?
En quoi se comparent les
Well, we say
scénarios
that
canadiens
even
et
within
américains?
Canada, we have significant regional differences. So we are
Il existe
different from what's happening in the United States in terms of their epidemiology. And we want to be able to stay in that epidemic control curve that I presented today. So we'll be doing everything that we can. I think the measures that we put in place, and the ministers may want to comment on that too, is really restricting travel to essential travel, ensuring that those essential services continue, but really cutting down on the amount of travel between the two countries to those essential travel will remain very key. And again, we can't adjust any of that until we've seen not just what happens within the Canadian context, but definitely what's happening on the other side of the border.
L'efficacité de ces mesures ici au Canada.
I'll just add, Mia, that today was our weekly call with my counterparts at the G7. The health ministers meet every week to talk about the scenario in our various countries and what's been working and the struggles that we are having collectively as countries. And one thing that was acknowledged, I think, by all partners was that there needs to be a global effort to eliminate COVID-19, that this can't be, Canada's problem will not be resolved until all countries have strong measures, both on the suppression of COVID-19, but also on the long-term treatment and prevention of COVID-19 in all of our populations. And that was recognized by all health ministers in that call.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. Notre prochaine question, our next question is from Hélène Buzetti avec Le Devoir. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Oui, bonjour. J'aimerais revenir sur les scénarios qui nous ont été présentés ce matin. Ce n'est toujours pas clair dans ma tête quel est, selon vous, le scénario le plus probable. Vos graphiques semblent miser sur un taux d'infection de 2,5 à 5 % pour un nombre de morts allant de 11 000 à 22 000. Mais il y a aussi le taux de 10 produisant 44 000 morts que M. Trudeau a utilisé ce matin. Alors, je comprends que vous n'avez pas de boule de cristal.
You don't have a crystal ball.
Quelle est la prédiction selon vous la plus probable?
In your opinion, what is the most probable projection?
Merci pour la question, c'est Dr. New. Comme on a dit ce matin, maintenant, on continue, tout le monde, tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes aussi, tous les ordres de gouvernement et les systèmes de soins de santé aussi, santé publique intégrés, pour continuer avec un scénario pour vraiment aplatir la courbe, on dit maîtrise de l'épidémie. Ça veut dire que on prévoit continuer peut-être avoir au futur un pourcentage 1% d'infection dans toute la population. Mais c'est sûr que 1% de toute la population canadienne, c'est pas dans un mois, c'est peut-être dans plusieurs mois, peut-être même une année ou plus. Donc, si on fait les calculs, avec une population de 37 millions, on prévoit peut-être avoir un total de cas peut-être 376 000. Mais ce n'est pas la seule chose à faire. Il faut aussi
that's not the only concern.
We must also avec une prévision peut-être pour 1%, on est vraiment au début de notre courbe épidémique.
We
Et
must
même à
remember
l'échelle
that we're just at
nationale,
the beginning
c'est vraiment
of the
seulement la
epidemic
somme
here.
des épidémies de toutes les régions à travers le
We
pays,
need
dans
to
toutes les
watch
provinces
how
et
the epidemic is
territoires.
moving
Donc,
in all
c'est
areas of the
difficile
country, in all the
prévoir
provinces and
exactement
territories.
quand
So
on
it's
va arriver au
difficult to
pic.
forecast exactly
Pour le
when
moment,
we're going to
actuellement,
arrive at
on
the
est
peak
vraiment
of
au
the wave.
début et on
Right
ne
now,
peut
we're
pas
just at
voir
the beginning
quand
of it.
on est arrivé au
And
pic.
we won't know we've arrived at the peak
On n'est pas arrivé sur la pente descendante.
until
Donc,
we're
pour l'instant,
already
c'est vraiment
starting to go down.
la priorité de tout le monde de
So
continuer avec nos
everyone's priority
meilleurs efforts
now is
de
really
distanciation
deploying all
physique.
efforts at
Et on verra
physical
d'une
distancing.
semaine à l'autre
And we
qu'est-ce
will
qui se
see
passe.
from one week to the next what happens.
Going back, sorry. In terms of where we're at, certainly from all of the best efforts, all Canadians, including all levels of government and also obviously the public health and healthcare system, we're looking at what we call a hopefully best case scenario, 1%. Sort of attack rate in the whole Canadian population. If you do the simple arithmetic, looking at the Canadian population of about 37 plus million, obviously that would translate to about 376,000 cases. But those 376,000 cases, we certainly don't expect it to happen overnight. We expect it to happen over many months, even a year or so. Look at where we're at today. We're about to, 20,000 cases now. So we still have a ways to go. Having said that, it's also difficult to predict exactly when we'll get to our peak because you won't know when you're at the peak till you're actually on the other side of the sort of downward curve. So it remains to be seen what happens over the coming weeks and months. But for the moment, in terms of what we're doing, I think we can't let go of our public health measures. Everyone is doing their best in terms of physical distancing. And I think we just have to watch week by week how we're doing as a country.
And as a follow-up, maybe I can ask Dr. Tam, it's not clear to me, so should I understand from what's being said that the 1% scenario is the one we are working on right now if everything remains the same? I understand we can't predict the future, but right now you're saying that the most probable scenario is the 1% one?
I wouldn't say the most probable because we don't know that yet. I would say that's the aspirational and our ambitious goal that we, provided in terms of the briefing today. And everything that we can do now will reduce that infectious rate and in as short a time as possible. So we called it our ambition because we will have to check to see exactly how much of the population is infected. Some of that kind of work, as we work through this first wave, would include, right now we're looking at what kind of serologic tests are available, for instance, that will help us determine how much of the population in the end of that first wave have actually been infected. So these are some of the data that still needs to be gathered.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll now turn to the room. Start with Mary Kay Walsh from the Globe and Mail.
Hi there. Still on the modeling, could you, we spoke with one academic who said that your models appear overly optimistic, that, for example, your best case scenario curve does not show the subsequent curves and that it therefore it might even be faulty because if we do have everybody on lockdown, unless they leave lockdown with a vaccine, there will be more spikes.
So this is a novel virus for which the population is not immune. So it's true that if after the first wave, and we did really, really well, only a small proportion of the population is in fact have encountered this virus as immune, we are in for a significant period of time where we would expect that public health measures to some extent will still be applied. It'll be, to me, a sort of new normal. We have to be really careful how to release some of those public health measures because the population is not immune. So we've seen a little diagram where there are little blips after the first big wave. I think these are scenario planning. What we want to do is to make sure that any subsequent wave is dealt with really rapidly and it stays below the capacity of the health system to be able to cope. So that's the concept of those scenarios. But those little waves could continue to occur for a number of months until either, say, a vaccine is discovered or then the majority of the population is immune in some way. But we can't go too far into the distant future in estimations because the virus could change. We don't even know if you are immune today, how long that immunity will last for. So by all means, we're not saying these scenarios exactly what's going to happen. This is an estimate, and these can be adjusted. But whoever that person is entirely correct. We have a long ways to go in the whole trajectory of this pandemic.
Okay, thank you. And Minister Hajdu, on my colleagues' reporting this morning on sort of the 2006 pandemic report and what it foretold and what we're now experiencing, I'm wondering if you regret that Canada was not better prepared, that Canada did not have what appear to be sufficient stockpiles, for example, in the emergency stockpile, and that things like widespread testing were not put into place early enough.
Well, I'll answer generally, and then I'll actually turn to Dr. Tam. But first of all, I want to thank the excellent leadership of our public health officials who have been guiding us through this since the emergence of this brand new virus at the end of December, early January. Obviously, Dr. Tam used the pandemic plan as a guidance document to stand up the organizations that led to, for example, the public health officials from all across the province and territories meeting on a regular basis very early on. In terms of the national stockpile, of course, always more could be done to prepare in terms of pandemics. I will also remind you that provinces and territories have stockpiles. And of course, the work that we're doing collaboratively right now on ensuring that frontline healthcare workers have what they need is critically important. I will also say that in terms of anticipating the behavior of the virus, I think Dr. Tam has repeated this a number of times. I think it bears repeating. This is a brand new virus. So even if we had testing capacity, so to speak, what kind of test? What did that look like? Those were all things that had to be essentially developed once we were able to receive the genetic sequence from China in those early days. And so I just want to, again, reiterate my thanks for the leadership of the phenomenal public health officials that have guided us through this. Certainly, we're grateful for their expertise and their involvement in determining our response. Did you want to speak a bit about the early testing and the challenges around that?
So I think Canada is a country that have done pandemic planning for longer than almost any other country in the world, and we have a strong history of doing that. That particular plan, 2006, came out just after SARS. We actually experienced another pandemic even after that, 2009. That led to essentially an evergreen plan, which you will be able to find on our website. And the lessons learned from 2009 is to be able to flexibly and scalably mount a response. You can't tell what the next pandemic might be like. So it's the flexibility in the system and taking a risk management approach. Instead of those specific phases that we had in 2006, we moved on to a much more flexible response. And based on my experience, as I've always said, when you've seen one pandemic, you've seen one pandemic. You cannot anticipate what that next. In fact, the best thing to do is throw out all the previous assumptions because they're likely to be wrong. We do have much better tools than before. Those genetic sequencing done in breakneck time, quite frankly, has allowed Canada to develop our PCR test really, really fast. I'm actually quite happy with the fact that there's a network of public health labs. We decentralize. Unlike some countries, we decentralize the test pretty fast. Quality assured, the provincial labs all picking up their ability to do so, and then now distributing the laboratory capacity down the line as well. And we are pursuing other tests. So I would essentially put it to all Canadians that we were one of the fastest countries in the world to establish good laboratory capacity. Could we do more? Sure. I'd just like to explain the NES, the National Emergency Stockpile, Strategic Stockpile, just a little bit. As we all know, the healthcare system is in the jurisdiction of provinces and territories, and they do have supply management. They use a lot of resources on a daily basis. At the federal level, we are much more strategic in what we have in that stockpile, and that's deliberate. We moved from the sort of Cold War model of what the National Emergency Stockpile looked like at the time to one that's highly specialized. In it is the country's only stockpile of certain specific countermeasures, like the smallpox vaccine, like the Ebola countermeasures, which no one else actually has. That's the role of the federal stockpile. We have some other smaller surge capacities, but it was never designed to back up the whole health system in Canada. What we do, though, is together with other government departments, put together the coordination mechanisms needed to pull together that infrastructure. We had a massive role in pandemic vaccine infrastructure building and putting it one of the world's first pandemic influenza vaccine contracts in the world. And we are striving to be as early as possible in a global leader in vaccine development and also ensuring that we look ahead to that day when we do have vaccine candidates, that we're in the best position for that. So that's some of the roles that we're doing. And you've seen multiple whole-of-government response looking to get any supply that we can. We're in a global global supply shortage situation for almost everything that we need. So I can certainly attest to the fact that everybody is pulling out all stops. And that is part of our role, is not to just stockpile stuff in a lot of places, but pull together the mechanism so that there's access.
Thank you, Dr. McKenzie.
Hi, Mackenzie Gray from CTV. Dr. Tam, got a question for you and Ms. Freeland as well as a part of this. On March 21st, we closed the border effectively for the entire world. We stopped the U.S. Citizens from coming in that day. Dr. Tam, when the models that we've seen today, how much did closing the border impact our ability to plank the curve, as you like to say? And Ms. Freeland, on this same issue, the Prime Minister has said essentially that we won't see normalcy in our lives until there is a vaccine. So can we conclude from that the border will not be reopened until we have a vaccine?
So, I well recall that particular week in March where almost everything happened, not just some of the border measures that the federal government played a key role in, and some of the travel advisories, but also everything else, like reducing mass gatherings. Much has been done by the provinces and territories within about that same time frame, which is why we're saying that these coming weeks are critical, because we systematically escalated all of those measures around that time period. So teasing out the exact contribution of every single one of those components may not be the easiest. What I will say is the whole world global traffic also went down at the same time. And we do know that if we looked at our cases, the contribution of travelers as being cases diminished over time.
So the Prime Minister did indeed explain, as Dr. Tam has done, that we need a vaccine to really be through this. In terms of what that reality means about the border, we just can't say today. And it would be foolhardy in the extreme to make long-term predictions about what border measures will be. Having said that, as you know, we have taken really meaningful measures at the border, including the land border with the United States. We have introduced mandatory quarantine for everyone coming into Canada wherever they begin their journey. And we have been introducing increasingly effective ways of enforcing that quarantine. All of those measures are really necessary, and they are helping us to protect the health and safety of Canadians.
And if I just might add, I think this is a question that all countries are facing right now as they try to contain their own community transmission and their cases go down. The question becomes, how will they manage then the importation of questions? And I would echo Minister Freeland and Dr. Tam that is unknown as of yet. But I will tell you that we are studying those countries that are ahead of us on the curve, that are on the downward slope, if you will, and looking how they contain those bumps of transmission very carefully so that we can learn from their experiences. And certainly, if there's any silver lining, it's that we are earlier on our journey in terms of the rise in the curve, that we're able to look at the experiences of other countries that have experienced that peak more recently than us.
Dr. Tam, everyone is in agreement, and we've brought this up a number of times in questions to you, that testing is a core component of being able to figure this out. We've spoken to a number of people who have spoken to their doctor, and they've said, okay, you should get tested for COVID, you're showing symptoms. They go to the testing facility and they say, we're not going to test you. At this point in time, are you considering making any changes to the restrictions in place for people when it comes to testing in Canada? And the modeling today has shown, and both Dr. New and you have spoken about this, that there will be multiple waves. How are we going to get these multiple waves under control if we don't expand the testing criteria that we have to include everyone who shows symptoms?
So we are improving our laboratory capacity, and I think that is ongoing at multiple fronts. And I think I've explained it in the last days, where we're trying to improve on the volume and the capacity for the PCR testing. There's a need to get the reagents and other components of that. And we're trying, again, it's like any supply, every way possible, including domestic, domestic concoctions, if you like, of the said reagents and all of that, so that we can improve capacity. And we are testing a significant number of people and have maintained a good rate of testing compared to many countries in the world. But we will continue to do that and look at point-of-care testing as well as the serologic testing in the future. What I will say is that when we provide guidance in terms of where the priority focus might be, and the people who absolutely have to be tested, including healthcare workers, the vulnerable population, etc. At the moment, our public health measures are such that mildly sick people we're advising to stay at home. And some of them are not being tested because we are focusing on priority groups. As the laboratory capacity changes and different kind of tests come on board, and we're in a different trajectory in the epidemic, then we have to increase testing as we come down the pandemic and trying to detect the next incursion. That's when we would have to test more widely again. So it is a very dynamic process, but we still expect our recommendations, and this is a behavior change for Canadians. If you're sick, stay home. The key is the public health action of breaking change of transmission, whether you've had the test or not. I do think that there is a role for, of course, serology to determine the basic immunity level in the population. There's a role potentially to look at how immunity works, particularly in groups that are vulnerable or groups that are delivering essential services. So those are some of the priorities going forwards. And so I think, we will evaluate that as we go along, but absolutely upping our lab testing capability is what all provinces and territories and us are trying to do right now.
Thank you, Dr. Maura. Politico.
Yes, thank you, Maura Forrest, Politico. This is, I think, for anyone who wants to answer it, but Canadians got a lot of pretty bleak information today, both in terms of job numbers and in terms of the projections of infections and fatalities. And aside from the information, there's still a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions that haven't been answered about when we might be on the other side of this. They're now heading into a holiday weekend where they're being asked to stay away from their families. And I just wonder how you think Canadians should react to this. How should they absorb this information and deal with it?
Well, first of all, I would just say that I understand that there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of distress and there's a lot of anxiety. And, I would say that all of us are feeling that with Canadians. I think this is a time where the uncertainty itself is, difficult to manage. Just the questions that we are receiving from all of you, essentially, when will this be over, I think is the pressing question that most Canadians have. When will this be over? As I've said, this is a time for us to pull together as Canadians. And I know that that fear is real, but it will take the courage of all of us to maintain the practices that public health has prescribed us, if you will, to end this situation earlier, to protect the health and the lives of our loved ones and our friends. And there are ways, personally, I think, that we can feel better. And for me, one of the ways that I feel better is when I do things for other people. Many people have reached out to me, by the way, and I thank all Canadians who have sent messages of encouragement and of positivity. But we can all do that in our lives to the people that are lonely and that are isolated. We can all send notes. We can all call those people that we know are struggling, or maybe even those that we're not thinking are struggling, to say that we're thinking of them. There are multiple ways to connect with people that aren't physical. And people are craving connection right now. They are craving connection with friends and with family. And I would say that it's important that we all reach out to the people in our lives. We can also help those people that are left behind. There are a whole bunch of people that are left behind. There are people that have no one and have no one to get groceries for them and have no one to actually check in on them. And it's, I think, the most Canadian thing that we could do is to remember all those people in our lives, and even those people that are not directly in our lives, that have been left behind in all of this, that are even more fragile and even more vulnerable. It might be the little old lady next door to you that has a really hard time getting around, that doesn't have anyone in their life. It might be that child on the road that looks at you beseechingly as you're walking your dog. People are saying hi way more than they ever did, and it's a genuine hi. It's a genuine hello. We can donate to charities if we have a little bit left over. We can see if our food bank needs a volunteer or two to help distribute food. And I think through the act of giving, through the act of reaching out, actually it makes us all feel better. And I realize this is not the simplest answer, but it certainly is one that I think, for me, has helped a lot. That when I step out of my own anxiety and my own worries and my own direct kind of world and I reach out to other people, it makes me feel better too. And so I think together, this is what we mean when we say together, Canadians will get through this.
And I just want to add one thing, Mara. You suggested that the data released today would make people feel frightened. And I think that's right. But what I would also like to say is information is power, and facts are powerful. And what we have had over the past 10 days or so is a tremendous sharing of information by governments across Canada, starting with the provinces that have been doing a terrific job of sharing really detailed data with the people in their provinces, and then with Dr. Tam and Dr. New sharing a sort of federal roll-up. And I would really encourage Canadians to feel informed and empowered by that data, because what that data says to me is we need to do what we are doing, and that while the physical distancing actions that we are all taking in our daily lives are hard, for sure they're hard, and it is hard to practice physical distancing, and it's really hard to lose your job because of it. Terrible. Having said that, to me, what the numbers show, what the data shows, is we're on the right track, and it is in our power, as Dr. Tam just said, to achieve that ambitious, aspirational target. We can all do it. We are all a part of it. So turn that very understandable, legitimate fear into power and a conviction that we all need to do this hard thing to get the best possible outcome for Canadians.
Thank you. And a follow-up from Minister Hajdu. There's been some debate about the possibility of virtual sittings of Parliament. and how important it is for Parliament to still convene in person, I wonder, do you believe that it's safe for Parliament to still sit in person with a reduced number of MPs?
I know the House Leader and the various folks that have their mind turned to this would only suggest convening in person with appropriate measures in place to protect the health and safety of all parliamentarians. As you can see, I'm in Ottawa every day. I want to thank all the cleaners who prepare this room for us every single day, and in between, there are measures that we can take in terms of sitting distantly from one another that would be applied, and certainly, if that decision is taken that we need to meet in person, I will count on all of the professionals in our lives who are working so hard to keep us safe as we have to physically attend our work sites.
Thank you, Minister. Operator will now turn to the phone for 2 more questions. 2 dernières questions avant de mettre fin à la conférence.
2 last questions before
Thank you. Merci. Our next question, notre prochaine question, is from Michel Lamarche avec TVA Nouvelles. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Bonjour, c'est une question pour le Dr New. J'aimerais vous questionner sur les pourcentages présentés ce matin de taux d'infection dans la population. Depuis le début des points de presse, vous nous parlez de 5 de personnes infectées dans ceux qui sont testés au pays. Est-ce que ça ne laisse pas entendre que les scénarios du 1% de la population infectée ou 2,5% des personnes infectées, ce sont les scénarios les plus réalistes?
Are the most realistic scenarios?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
On a dit plusieurs fois que les résultats des tests de laboratoire, c'est toujours une sous-estimée de la réalité. Parce que c'est pas tout le monde qui tombe malade, qui s'est exposé, est atteint avec l'infection, qui est allé avoir une dépistage, une test. Donc, le pourcentage, c'est un peu élevé, on dit 5%, mais on sait qu'il y a beaucoup de personnes peut-être atteintes avec l'infection, on ne sait même pas maintenant actuellement. Comme on dit aussi, au futur, on pense aussi d'avoir des autres tests de laboratoire, comme des sérologiques, pour avoir une meilleure estimée de la proportion de la population qui peut être infectée avec qui a aussi à monter une réponse immunologique pour avoir des anticorps. Ça c'est la base de test sérologique. Donc, je pense qu'on est vraiment au début de la courbe épidémique pour le pays. Et si on continue tout le monde avec nos meilleurs efforts, je pense qu'on a une bonne chance d'avoir, comme dit, le meilleur scénario de 1% taux de détection de toute la population. Mais c'est trop tôt pour prévoir exactement qu'est-ce qui va se passer. Et c'est aussi un autre enjeu. Et je sais que tous les provinces et territoires continuent maintenant avec les meilleurs efforts d'augmenter la capacité laboratoire aussi pour dépister et tester tout le monde au fur et à mesure qui ont besoin. Aussi, actuellement, on sait que les tests, c'est basé sur quelque chose, le séquençage génétique. Et
the tests use genetic sequencing.
Je sais que tous les provinces et territoires augmentent la capacité pour commencer cette sorte de technologie. Mais on est aussi en train d'augmenter notre outil avec des autres dépistages tests, comme on dit, plus les points au service et aussi les dépistages sérologiques à voir. Enfin, on va voir, j'espère, une plus grande suite des outils pour dépister toute la population. Mais c'est quelque chose qu'il faut suivre de jour à jour, d'une semaine à l'autre.
Is evolving from day to day and from week to week.
Pour vous, Dr. New, j'aimerais vous entendre sur les centres de soins de longue durée, les CHSLD, les résidences privées également pour personnes âgées. On le dit depuis le début, les hôpitaux sont capables de gérer pour le moment au pays. Par contre, on se rend compte que dans les centres de soins de longue durée, dans les résidences privées pour personnes âgées, là, ça ne gère pas du tout. On le voit dans bien des provinces. Est-ce qu'il y a des mesures? Et là, je vous demande une réponse
Are there measures, and now I'm asking you for a specific and concrete answer, please. Are there measures that you yourself can implement to help provinces immediately help all those places function better?
Merci pour la question. On sait que oui, c'est vraiment un environnement. Les populations les plus vulnérables sont les personnes âgées dans vous avez dit, les établissements de soins de longue durée. C'est plus difficile des fois dans un établissement comme ça d'utiliser les mesures nécessaires parce que c'est peut-être possible que dans un établissement, on n'a pas beaucoup de chambres privées. On accepte aussi que c'est toujours à l'échelle locale, aussi provinciale et territoriale, c'est les autorités qui gèrent comment ça fonctionne dans les établissements avec le personnel, aussi les mesures dans les établissements de soins de longue durée. Ce qu'on fait maintenant actuellement, c'est Dr. Tam et moi et les autres aussi, tous les médecins hygiénistes en chef, on discute un enjeu actuel, c'est peut-être des lignes directrices, les orientations pour les établissements de soins de longue durée. Et ça peut aider aussi le personnel et les établissements au futur pour mieux gérer la situation. Mais c'est quelque chose, c'est un enjeu actuel et on sait que c'est une priorité pour tout le monde.
Thank you, doctor. Opérateur, une dernière question, s'il vous plaît.
One last question, operator.
Thank you. Merci. Notre dernière question, our last question, is from Micheline Laflamme avec Radio-Canada. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde. Alors, ce matin, vous avez fait connaître vos données, vos modèles. Vous avez parlé du nombre cumulatif de décès.
Your modeling, you talked about infection rates, mortality rates. You also talked about the number of people in intensive care. But there were also data about the number of sick people who will require ventilators. You surely have an idea of how many ventilators there are in the country right now. So, from what percentage of an infected population will our health? At what percentage rate will our healthcare become overwhelmed?
Dr. New, encore. Merci pour la question.
Dr. New is
c'est difficile à estimer, mais
thank you for the question.
On pense que peut-être que si on prend le pire scénario, que tout le monde qui a besoin de soins intensifs est peut-être une candidate pour avoir un respirateur artificiel. Donc, on a fait des calculs et on sait plus ou moins avec les estimés des provinces et territoires, c'est quoi, comme dit, le nombre des respirateurs artificiels à travers le pays. Mais comme on a dit plusieurs fois, ce n'est pas seulement une question de nombre de personnes qui ont peut-être besoin d'un respirateur artificiel, mais c'est aussi le temps. J'utilise toujours l'exemple que peut-être dans une population sensible, on peut toujours avoir 1000 personnes qui peut-être si les 1000 personnes tombent malades avec l'infection, ils auront besoin d'un soin intensif et même un respirateur artificiel. Mais si nous réussissons comme toute une population et aplatir la courbe, les 1000 personnes dans cette population qui auront besoin d'un peut-être soin intensif ou un respirateur artificiel, c'est vraiment une différence pour ne pas déborder le système de soins de santé. Si les 1000 personnes tombent malades dans la même semaine ou pendant plusieurs mois, pour avoir un système de soins de santé qui est capable d'accommoder tous les patients.
Micheline, on suivi?
Micheline, do you have a follow-up question?
Oui, d'accord, merci.
Thank you.
Pour mieux contrôler la propagation du virus, l'Alberta et la Colombie-Britannique ont annoncé
the spread of the disease.
des stratégies
BC and Alberta announced this week new strategies to ensure that those coming into the province comply with self-isolation orders and reduce the risk of the spread. So to better contain this virus and perhaps during following waves,
géolocalisation, par exemple, ou la proposition de la Colombie-Britannique d'avoir
or BC's proposal of having
scénario d'isolement. Est-ce que ce sont des mesures, Madame Freeland,
qui pourraient
être encouragées à travers le pays ou
should be encouraged across the country, or that you think you may
nous avons travaillé en étroite collaboration avec la Colombie-Britannique concernant les mesures additionnelles qui étaient annoncées hier. Et nous sommes en train de travailler avec tous les autres provinces et territoires pour mettre en place les mesures comme ça.
In order to implement such measures.
Each
province has its own specific characteristics.
But nous appuyons fortement ce que la Colombie-Britannique a fait en étroite collaboration avec nous et nous sommes absolument prêts et
we are absolutely ready, and not only ready, but today and yesterday and the day before yesterday, we're firmly committed to working with all provinces and territories on that
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. That's all the time we have today. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
This brings the press conference to an end. Thank you.